Right, I think we will now move ahead. So, Lucy, if we can go on to the next slide. We have a great webinar for you today. The first and second, very popular, looked at the value proposition for selling beneficial products at the base of the pyramid and the marketing approach. How do you persuade people to buy? Today, we're looking at the distribution mechanism, the last mile distribution. And if you've got assumptions on what works, I think Lucy will challenge them. I thought that everybody just thought distribution was a big problem, a big headache. You have to invest in it, and we kind of all had the same problem. But actually, we're going to hear from Hystra about some huge differences that they have found between different companies in their approach and their success. So I'm really looking forward to today's webinar. Whether you're at breakfast or that after lunch lull or getting into your evening, I hope your brain cells are working, because there's some hard-working graphs and some rich data coming up. So you may well know our speaker well by now, Lucy Klaasveld-McGrath, the Senior Project Manager from Hystra, which is a consulting firm working on hybrid strategies at the base of the pyramid. I'm here on behalf of the Practitioner Hub for Inclusive Business, which is an online platform to analysis, insights, good practice, and information on inclusive business implementation. During the webinar, please type your questions in the chat function at any time. Join our conversation on Twitter. And as you'll know from previous webinars, if you've been with us, we have some polls for you to join in. And the first poll is to actually see whether you've already listened to the first two webinars, or watched them, or were in attendance, or went to them on YouTube, because that affects how much of a recap we should do. So we're now going to run the first poll. So you can just tell us whether you joined the first or the second webinar. Just tick whichever box is relevant to you. First webinar, second webinar, or neither. Just give you 5 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much. I hope you will tick the box. We're now going to see the results. Okay, great. So more than half of you weren't able to attend those. So for those of you that did, just bear with us for a minute. We will just quickly cover some of the key items we had on the previous webinars. Lucy started by asking this question. Lucy, I think perhaps we should run this again, given our audience today. Do you want to go through this and we'll do this poll?
Sure. So first question to all of you. Obviously, you're still allowed to vote if you were there last time, even though this might skew the results a little bit. Solving most of the world poor's basic needs, such as access to safe water, energy, sanitation, housing, etc. What do you think? Will require much more technology and product innovation, or could largely be achieved by improving existing products' road to market, as life-changing goods exist but do not reach their intended beneficiaries? I don't know if we have a poll ready for that. Perfect. So please answer, put your answer as one or the other, not both. Waiting a little bit for people to fill it in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and let's see the results. So we have most people saying that it could largely be achieved by improving existing products' road to market. Indeed, the title of the webinar kind of hints into that direction, but yeah, that's right. What we found is that basically a lot of great products actually already exist, whether we're talking about solar panel, home improvement project, improved cook stoves, irrigation pumps, solar lanterns, latrines, which might sound not a very innovative product, but in some places nearly nobody has latrines. These products exist and could truly make an impact on people's lives. But somehow these products don't reach their intended beneficiaries, the people at the base of the pyramid. And this is due to basically broken downstream value chains. The marketing, sales, financing, after sales don't happen as they should. This is due to a number of reasons, such as lack of cash and risk aversion, and the need for replacement parts, which increases this risk aversion from the customers. And on the company side, a reluctance to go into these markets because each transaction is relatively small. The infrastructure, when you start going into rural areas, is very poor. and the geographic dispersion of the customers make them very costly to just reach physically. Fortunately, there are some projects that have worked. This graph shows how many projects Histra specifically looked at. I should say just a quick word. Histra, as Caroline mentioned, is a strategy consulting firm. We're specialized in BOP markets and social businesses. And the way we work is we work from what works, basically. So we really study the models that have already been out there, try to understand what has made them succeed or not succeed, and then try to share the learnings for others to succeed faster, as we're doing today. So across the projects we've looked at, and that was by the end of 2015, today it's a little bit more, we looked at over 1,500 social business projects, of which 919 truly had a market-based mechanisms and were already proven beyond the pilot stage. We did detailed case studies on over 120 of those. And then based on this work, and in particular the work we did in housing, water, energy, a little bit on agriculture, and a little bit on nutrition and micro-distribution too, we've compiled what you'll see today, which is a cross-sectorial analysis of what works in distribution, marketing, and sales. Which this has allowed us to run company workshops with over 40 companies, specifically reviewing their sales and marketing strategies. And as we went through this process, we've also worked from them. So our initial benchmark of 15 companies selling durable goods and 10 companies selling fast-moving consumer goods for the base of the pyramid has now grown to a database of over 60 projects. And so we'll try to share the learnings from that today. So, sorry, I just lost my screen there. Sorry. So moving on, we'll try to make this as interactive as possible, so don't hesitate to answer. I saw that not all attendees filled in the previous poll. Please feel free to answer this one. Oh yeah, very briefly before we get into this week's learning. So what we've learned over the past two webinars, so the first one was on value proposition. And we saw together how talking about the economics of the product and its financial value to the client is the key argument that helps sell, obviously, if your product is providing economic benefits. We've also seen that risk-free solutions and not cheap products are what people are looking for, and they're actually ready to pay more for a product that they truly think is risk-free and valuable than they would be otherwise. And cheap products don't actually sell very well. Third, we've seen that the financing aspect of things is better done if in-house as opposed to with partners. If you want to learn more about this, I invite you to go back to the recording of the first webinar. The second webinar last week was on how below-the-line marketing works better. So proximity marketing and basically going towards the client to show them, allow them to test the product and hear even from their neighbor how it's been working for some time. And that hence responsible and effective marketing happens after the sale, because basically that's when you have to make sure your clients are satisfied and using the product and generating positive word of mouth. This you can find on the second webinar if you weren't there last week. So moving on to the poll to start this week's session on distribution. What do you think? We can maybe start the poll now so that people can read it and answer it as we read it. Which of these is true about the BOP market for innovative, durable goods? One cannot keep a stable field force in developing countries because salespeople will always leave for better prospects. A key factor to lower the field force turnover, so how many people leave you in one given year, is to recruit people who really care about the business social mission, and in exchange for that commitment, provide them a career path and continuous rewards. Or a key factor to lower field force turnover is to pay them well. You can only vote for one in this one. So give you some time to think. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's have the answer. All right, so we now have 29 people out of 33 who answered the poll, so 85% of people saying that the key factor to lower the field force turnover is to recruit people who really care about the business social mission, rather than to pay people well. Nobody answered that you couldn't keep a stable field force. So you're right, there are ways to keep a stable field force, but what we found is that actually it's the money that makes people stay. Yes. So we have here a picture of Greenlight Planet employees and Salesforce in India. And as you can see, they all look very happy. And what we've seen throughout companies, including theirs, is that what really motivates the Salesforce to stay is a good salary and close management. If you look here, we have looked across the companies, the data on the right, each line is basically one company, and the data correspond to the yearly field Salesforce churn. So basically what percentage of your Salesforce leaves within a given year. And we've tried to match it with different type of ways in which people try to have their people stay in the company. And what we've seen is that what really makes a difference isn't the career opportunity or the awards and rewards saying you're a good employee, or it's not systematical in any case. The one systematic thing that seems to lower churn is to have a competitive salary, competitive meaning basically if you compare this to other opportunities people would have in the same environment, it has to be at least as good. And close management. Close management means typically one manager for 6 to 8 salespeople so that he can spend about half a day a week with each person individually. So a direct relationship between the manager and the person he manages. The other things, as you can see, well, there's not really any correlation. Even companies that are doing career opportunities and awards and rewards still get 60% of turnover, for example. So yes, paying people well is the first thing you need to do if you want to keep your sales force. Another thing I want to point out too is that very often there are two different goals that can be mistaken when people think about how they want to reward their sales force. There is the goal of keeping people, basically making sure they don't leave you and that the experience they gain stays with you. This is what this is about. The second thing is incentivizing them to become better salesperson. And for that one, yes, awards and rewards is something that works well. For example, having an employee of the month for the one person who actually sells more than his other team members. And it works even better if you inform them throughout the month about where they stand, telling them you're now second in your region in terms of sales, so make a little bit more effort, you'll get first and you'll get the reward at the end of the month. So these kind of things are indeed great to motivate the sales force to sell better, but they're not the key things that will make them stay with you. So we're going to move to the second point of this presentation about choosing the right distribution approach. This poll is going to be a little tricky, so I need you to pay full attention. So can we also try to launch the poll as I describe the various options? Thank you very much. So which of these statements is true? In this one, you can select up to 2 statements. The best sales force for distributing beneficial goods at the base of the pyramid is local people, as they know their neighbors well and can overcome the trust issue, or mobile professional salespeople, as they can deliver a very convincing pitch to overcome the trust issue. Third, salespeople who sell several categories of goods because they can earn more overall revenue, or different sales force for different products because each product needs a specific speech to sell. So I'll read it once again. The best sales force for distributing beneficial goods at the BOP is first, local people as they know their neighbors well and can overcome the trust issue, or mobile and professional salespeople as only they can deliver a convincing pitch to overcome the trust issue. Salespeople who sell several categories of goods because they can earn more overall revenue, or different sales force for different products because each product needs a specific pitch to sell. So you can answer 2 different answers. Count until 5, 4, until 1 rather, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's look at the answers. So this time we have most people saying 73% of the answer of people say that local people are best because they know their neighbors well and can overcome the trust issue. 13 people, so the rest saying that it's mobile professional salespeople who can sell better. And then we have 19 people saying salespeople who sell several categories of goods, as opposed to only 16 people saying different sales force for different products. So actually the two winners would be local people and people who sell several categories of goods. Actually, as we're going to see with data, and I mean, I'm not trying to preach anything, I'm just saying what we saw in the data. The salespeople who sell best are mobile professional salespeople, and they sell best if they sell just one category of products. Let's try to understand how and why. So we're going to see in this part that choosing the right distribution model will depend on what goods you're trying to sell and where you're trying to sell them. That sounds pretty obvious, but now let's see how we get to that. The first thing that is important to look at when you're trying to see if you have a good sales force or not is how much your sales agents are selling. What we've tried to represent on this graph, again, each line is a different company we studied, and each line represents the average sales per salesperson that their sales force manages to have. So how much one salesperson on average sells per year. You can see that we have part-time salespeople for some companies and full-time salespeople for others. In order to compare apple to apple, we have made all of this data per full-time equivalent. So if people were full-time, we've just put how much really they were selling per year. If people were part-time, for example, if they were half-time, we multiply their yearly sales by 2 to say if they were full-time, this is how much they would be selling. In spite of multiplying how much these part-time salespeople sell by the amount needed so that they look like full-time, you can see that all the part-time salespeople actually appear in the lower half of the graph. And part-time salespeople on a full-time equivalent basis don't manage to reach $20,000 of sales per year for one person. While on the contrary, all the full-time salespeople manage to reach above $20,000 per sales agent per year. So this is quite important to understand, because this means that basically the guys on top are better at selling. So where does that come from? Basically, if you're full-time, by definition, you're already working more than your part-time equivalent. So after a month of working, you'll have gained more experience than your part-time equivalent. So that means you're going to be better. So that explains one thing. The second thing is, because you're going to sell better, you're also going to earn a better salary, because typically part of your salary will be on commission. Because you're getting a better commission, you're more likely to stay, because as we saw, what really matters to you at the beginning when you're selling is whether I earn enough or not, which makes sense. So basically, because of this, the part-time salespeople are usually much more junior, because many more people leave and need to be replaced. So the overall sales force is younger and less experienced. So that's one of the reasons that explains why part-time salespeople sell not as well as full-time salespeople on average. Now, let's look at what it means in terms of their salary more concretely. So on the left side of the graph, we have the same one we had before, the sales per full-time equivalent per salespeople. And on the right side, we've matched that with how much these salespeople are making on average for these same companies. And you can see that indeed, the part-time salespeople on a full-time equivalent basis don't basically manage to reach an income of $2,000 per year. Even though all these companies come from different regions, etc., it really seems that $2,000 per year is really the minimum for people to stay for long enough time to basically, learn their job, etc. And so if you can't pay your sales force $2,000 per year, you're probably going to face this issue of churn, etc. So that explains what I was mentioning before, that issue of why the part-time salespeople is younger and doesn't sell as well. So one other thing I want to say about this, because we talked also about who is selling just one category of product and who is not. Among these different companies we have here, we've represented in light blue the ones that are multi-category. So that said, okay, I actually would like to increase the salary of my sales force because they're not selling enough, and also increase their salary. So I'm going to provide them with more goods. And this is the result. Actually, and here we have to be very careful. We're talking here about selling complicated beneficial goods that people don't know yet. We're not talking about the products people already know about and desire. We're talking about selling these new products that will make people's life better, but that are complicated to sell. If you give a salesperson, and in particular a local salesperson, several of these goods to sell, they're going to have to learn different pitch to sell these different products. And it's actually making their job very difficult. If they have to spend 20 minutes demonstrating a stove, and then 20 minutes demonstrating a water filter, and then 20 minutes explaining why a nutritious product is better for children than a non-nutritious product, they're going to spend their time talking and never making a sale, versus making a very convincing pitch that will actually manage to sell very well the product afterwards. So I think that's all I wanted to say on this. Maybe one last comment on this. Very often the part-time guys, why are they part-time as well? It's very often because of this choice of having local people as salespeople. If you want to have local people as salespeople, it means by definition they're going to be local. They're not going to travel a lot. They're just going to go see their neighbors. If they only see their neighbors, they have a limited reach by definition. They can only go that far in terms of going out to see people. If they only can see that low amount of people per day, well, then they're probably not going to be able to spend their whole day selling. So they need another job on the side. Also, because they're not selling a lot, they need another job on the side. And even providing them additional products to sell, well, once they've saturated their area with water filters, if you give them cook stoves, they'll saturate their area with cook stoves. And then, I mean, it's tricky to keep nourishing them new products because you need to retrain them every time in the new product, et cetera, et cetera. And again, that explains why they're not managing to sell as well as their full-time counterparts. So I know these are a lot of numbers, and there's yet the worst graph to come. So basically, let's try to understand, based on this, where this data comes from. If you're a salesperson, how much you're going to sell per year depends on two things: the price of the product you're selling and how many people you're seeing. How many people you're actually selling to. Your number of clients multiplied by the price at which you sell your product will give you how much sales you're making in 1 year. So we've tried to disaggregate these two dimensions for these various companies on the graph that follows. So as you can see on this graph, the various companies we look at had very different results on these two dimensions. On the x-axis here, we've represented the client spending, so how much your client pays for your product and maybe for the replacement things they'll need to buy afterwards over 1 year. And on the y-axis, we represented the other dimension, so how many clients your salespeople manage to reach in a given year. Again, we've put that per full-time equivalent to be able to compare apple to apple. You might remember on the previous slide, this yellow line here, that yellow line that shows you the difference between part-time people and full-time people, and also shows you the difference in terms of sales per salesperson between the companies that manage to sell over $20,000 of sales per year and those that don't. We've done the same line representing $20,000 of sales per full-time equivalent per year on this graph here. That's the yellow line you have here. Basically, everybody who is above that line is a company whose sales force manages to sell over $20,000 per year on average, while those on the other side are those that don't. So basically, the purple dots here are all the part-time companies that we had on the previous graph. So what does that mean concretely? Because all this is very abstract until now. Basically, these 4 different rounds or circles here represent 4 different ways of selling and distributing your products. The first one, on the top right, we've called the hunting model. The hunting model is that of Toyola selling his improved cook stoves in Ghana, typically for products that cost $0 to $20. So an amount where potentially you wouldn't really need financing, end-user financing. Maybe the people will need some time to save the money, but you're not necessarily going to need to give them a loan. And as you can see, for products around this price range, you get 4,400 stoves on average sold, or up to 9,000 stoves or other products sold on average for one salesperson in 1 year. So how do you manage to have a salesperson reaching that many clients? Let me tell you more about the Toyola approach. So Toyola has very mobile salespeople. That's why we've called them hunting, because they basically go out with their car with a lot of stoves in the back of the car, and they go out to rural areas to hunt clients. Well, obviously they don't really hunt. They just try to sell them stoves. So they, I just answered to that, which point on the graph is Toyola? The reason why we have all this data from companies is because we do not disclose individual company data. So Toyola is somewhere in the hunting model. But in any case, so they go to rural areas and they arrive with their car over there, and they do a demonstration, and they show how the stove allows you to save charcoal compared to a traditional cook stoves. Then they get people who are interested to buy one, and they tell them, you're the first buyers. Obviously, people are risk averse, so there might be just 3 or 4 in the community. If for those who were there in the first session, you might remember that Toyola offers them to actually try the stove for free and just pay a little extra for the loan they're getting to try the stove for free for 1 month. And most people do that. So they will say, okay, I'll take the stove for free and I'll pay you a little bit more in 1 month when you come back if I'm happy with it. And Toyola tells them, wait a second, in addition to this, you know what? If you actually find me, you're happy with the stove and you actually find me 10 clients when I come back next month, you don't need to pay me for the stove. The stove for you is free. But I need to have 10 clients when I come back. And so a month later, before coming back, Toyola sales agent called back the first clients they had and asked them, do you have 10 clients? Do you have 20 clients for me? So that I put enough stove in the back of my car. And when they go back, the first clients, which they call their evangelists, has already recruited the 10, 20, 30 additional clients that they're going to be able to sell to. They basically serve to aggregate the orders so that every time, except for the first time they go to a village, of course, but every time they go back to that village afterwards, they're ensured that they're going to sell at least 20, 30 stoves at once. So that's one way of aggregating the sales. The second one is retail, which is why we've put the plus retail here. So at the beginning, Toyola was mostly doing demonstrations, etc. But then the stove started to be known because it saves people money. And so they started being able to sell in retail shops. So Toyola sales agents act basically as salespeople and distributors, both towards evangelists in rural areas, so selling through their first clients to the rest of the village, and through retailers in urban areas where they leave stoves in depot and come back every week to replenish after the weekly market. But basically, every time they move and every time they stop to leave stove in a place, they don't stop for one. They stop for 5, 10, 15, 50. I actually was in the car with them, and I can tell you 70 stoves go easy in 1 day with this method. So that was for products that are basically, again, in the $0 to $20 range, where you don't necessarily need credit, or maybe just 1 month's credit or free trial, but that's it. Now, what do you do for products that are more expensive? You have a variant of this hunting model, which we've called the shifting cultivation model. The shifting cultivation model are the points in blue here, one example of which is Purit. Purit is a water filter by Hindustan Unilever in India, and they sell it through, as you can see here, in particular with partnerships with MFIs, where their sales agents go and do the demonstration during the MFI gathering and during directly to the group. Their product is more expensive. It's between $50 and $70 for a water filter. Sorry. And so basically what they do is that they do the demonstration and convince people to take a loan to buy their product. But the loan lasts 6 months, sometimes even up to a year. So they need to be sure that people keep repaying. And the MFI party takes care of that, but it's better to also have the sale agent there to make sure, that people keep paying if there's any issue. So what they do is that their sales agents are also relatively mobile, but they move in group. So they will really target one region, really try to get to the maximum density by going back to the same group week after week to make sure payments are happening and to continue the cycle of sales. And once they've saturated an area and gotten back all the payments, they move together to the next area and do again this saturation thing of going back to the same village over and over again, which allows them to give them time also to collect the payment and then move to the next, etc. Which is why we've called this the shifting cultivation model. Now, if we move to the third model that's above the $20,000 sales per year, which is the farming model. The farming model is typically for products that are more expensive, as you can see, around $300 or more. It's typically for products that require a whole ecosystem of services around that product to sell. So for example, solar home systems like the one sold by Selco or Solar Now, the two examples that are in the picture here. Why have we called this farming? Because these are very complicated products to sell. People are also relatively afraid something will go wrong because they're going to take loans this time over a year, maybe 2 years, 3 years. So you really need to be there physically. You can't have this hunting model where you're there and then you're gone, or the shifting cultivation where you're there for a while, but there you're gone again. So they basically set up local offices or local branches from which they will have technicians and salespeople working together who will go and cover maybe a 50 kilometers up to 100 kilometer radius area around where they work. And we'll do the sales, we'll do the installation, we'll do the maintenance, we'll make sure you're satisfied with the product, and we'll basically stay for the long term. So these models typically take a much longer time to saturate their area because each sale has a long lead time, they're complicated sale, but they're much more valuable sales. So you can afford to have all this time spent, one salesperson spending that much time speaking to your clients. And as you can see, one salesperson typically sells less than 500 systems per year, as opposed to the over 4,000 we had for the hunting model. But that's okay again, because in terms of total sales per year, you're still going to be above the $20,000 per sales agent. Now, the last model, which is the one of the part-time sales agent, we've called the gardening model, because this model is basically really one of gardening. You have local salespeople who are going to sell your product part-time when they have the time on the side as a side income or a side thing they're doing. So it's really the same principle as gardening. You do that because it's not a lot of effort. It brings you just a little bit of money, but you might just drop it off as well at some point because it's not absolutely key in your livelihood, and it will never be. So that was again a lot of theory. I'll be very happy to discuss this all in the questions afterwards. But now this was mostly about durable goods, as you might have noticed. We did a similar study for fast-moving consumer goods, again with this caveat that we looked at goods that are difficult to sell, not the obvious things people already know and want, but things where they're going to need to trust you, to trust while your water is better than the water they were drinking before, that their parents drank before them and their grandparents before them, or to trust why your nutritious product is going to be better for their kids than what they were giving their kids before, etc. So for these products, this was in particular a study we did for nutrition, but it's pretty much true for other FMCGs that are beneficial and difficult to sell. What we've seen is that the best or the most sustainable sales strategy is to try to end up in retail, for that you need to sell competitively priced products, and you need to get your product known enough, which we discussed last week can be quite tricky. So basically, when do you use door-to-door then? Door-to-door is very useful when you have a new market in order to get to that retail, which is only once you have a mature market. And basically the new market, to conquer it, to make your products known, as we've seen last week, big marketing campaigns are not what will convince people. What will convince people is this door-to-door interaction and the fact that they can try the product and taste it, etc. So door-to-door is actually a great way to introduce a new product category and to build a new brand. Now, the challenge with the door-to-door when you're selling these fast-moving consumer goods is that the value of one transaction is very small. You're just selling a product maybe less than $1 per transaction. So you need to make sure your salesperson sees enough clients so that she sells enough to earn or I'm saying she, but if he or she sells enough to then earn enough income as a percentage of the sales they're making, which is why door-to-door, your single product door-to-door system can only work and make economical sense in urban areas. Now, there are two other cases where you can use door-to-door in an economically viable way. One is if you're not just offering a product, but also additional convenience, which people will be ready to pay a premium for. For example, I think in the first presentation 2 weeks ago, we discussed how that works for water, for Nandi water. Nandi water, they sell this water in 20-liter jugs, which are very heavy. And people are ready to pay more if the water jug is delivered to their home every day than if they have to go themselves to fetch it at the plant. Because they're ready to pay more, then you can have a distribution system that works and that is financially viable for distributing this water day after day. Another example would be Nutrizaza, which is a social business in Madagascar, which sells improved nutritious porridge for children. And what they do is they have a door-to-door sales force, or distribution force, I should say, that goes to the peri-urban areas of Madagascar and sells the porridge every morning at the time of breakfast, warm and ready to eat, to the mothers. And the mothers really value that service because, you know, they don't have to cook anything special just for the little one, while they know that it's better than if they just fed him the basic rice that they would cook for the rest of the family. So what people really value there is actually the additional services around the products. And this is also something that can, even if you're in a mature market, it can justify that you keep having a door-to-door sales force because people will be ready to pay more for these additional services you're offering them. Now, there's yet another case where you can use a door-to-door sales force if you're in rural areas. As we've just discussed, using door-to-door for FMCG in rural areas, probably you just won't get enough clients for your salesperson to make a living. But if there is already in this rural area a direct sales force that exists and you can add your product on top of that sales force, then why not do it? For you as a company selling a product, that's probably the best strategy you can have. With one caveat, as we've seen, multi-category sales force don't sell very well because it's complicated.
So I'm just trying to work if we have lost Lucy or if the problem is my end. Okay, so we have lost Lucy. We'll get the presentation back up. Which I think Lucy will join. Let me show the presentation from my machine for now, if I can. Okay, the presentation is coming back. Now, oh, Lucy, you're back.
Sorry. Hi.
Great.
Hi.
I was just starting to share my screen, but I will stop that and hand it back to you.
I'm very sorry. I just forgot to plug in my computer. Very sorry about that. I'll just relaunch the PowerPoint right away.
Can you do it on my screen?
Whatever, I can. I have the PowerPoint there, so
okay, sure. If your machine doesn't take ages,
it should be fine. I'm really sorry about that. All right, can everybody see again? Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so sorry about that again. I was just saying leveraging an existing network is actually something that really works as well. At the condition, well, or rather it will work better if that existing network is monocategory and corresponds to the products you're selling. For example, in the case of the BRAC network of Shashtia Shebika in Bangladesh, they have, I think, over 50,000 sales ladies who are rather community health workers than sales ladies. And they decided to leverage this network to sell micronutrient powders that you can add to the food for children so that they can get better health, become more healthy, which is a good that makes sense when you're already a community health worker. It's coherent with basically a health offer. So that worked very well. Now, if you're trying to add a product that is complicated to sell to a basket of goods that has nothing to do with your product, sales will probably prove much more tricky. So to sum this up, for specifically the fast-moving consumer goods, what we've seen across the about 20 companies we've looked at in this space is that door-to-door sales force for FMCGs, these are again the sales per, in $1,000 per sales per full-time equivalent per year. So the same graph we saw before with all the companies in blue. These are the how much one salesperson on average manages to sell, whether they are monocategory, multi-category, in rural areas or in urban areas. And as you can see, in rural areas, that's what I was saying earlier, whether you're monocategory or multi-category, the local sales force are just not selling over $5,000 worth of goods within 1 year, full-time equivalent. If you're multi-category, again, whether you're in rural areas or in urban areas, sales force don't manage to sell over $4,000 per person per year. The only option which seems viable, potentially viable, a little bit more viable in any case than the others, is to have a monocategory sales force in urban areas. So we've seen a lot of things. Let's try to sum it up in one graph. Here we've tried to show what are the different potential options that I just see one question on the graph, so I'll answer that now as well. For multi-category, is the figure per product? No. It's how much one salesperson sells of all the products in his or her basket of goods. So that's really the sales per salesperson, full-time equivalent, whether it's your product or it's actually the whole basket of goods that person is selling. So if we try to sum this up, this is more or less the graph which of what we have seen work, depending on what products you're selling in which area. So the question is, the first question is, does your product require additional services, which can be the promotion if your product is not very well known yet, financing, delivery, maintenance, or it can be the convenience of having the warm porridge at home, for example. If no, then don't bother, just go to retail. If yes, the next question is it a fast-moving consumer goods? If so, do you plan to sell in urban areas? And if yes, then it's worth setting up a local delivery team that will do the same route weekly or daily and make the product known and get the cycle working. Again, monocategory, don't try to add the products to what they're already selling to their basket, because that won't work. If you're not planning to sell in urban areas, then the question is there a network you can leverage? If yes, then great, leverage that existing network. Again, it will probably have different level of efficiency and effectiveness depending on whether it corresponds to your product category or not. If not, and your product is new and needs marketing, etc., for rural areas, fast-moving consumer goods, you probably can't make it work from scratch. You're going to need to start in urban areas, make the product known, so that then you can go to retail in rural areas. It depends what your goal is, but if you're trying to get a sustainable sales force, it won't work in rural areas for this type of products. Or in any case, we've never seen anybody that made it work. Now, going back to earlier in the branch, we're not selling FMCG, we're selling durable goods. Then the next question is, does your product require credit? If it doesn't, or just simple credit up to 1 month, you can go to the hunting model, setting up very mobile salespeople with the vast exclusive territory. If it requires 2 to 6 months credit, and it's more or less $20 to $100 worth. Shifting cultivation model, but obviously these barriers are a little fluctuating. It might not be exactly $20, it might not be exactly $100. Typically for a product at $100, you could probably try either of these approaches, and then it will depend how much actual services you're going to need to add on, how much local presence you're going to need, whether you're going to do the shifting cultivation or the farming. But anyway, if your product requires long credit over 6 months or maybe over 1 year, you're going to need a farming model, setting up local branches with professional full-time staff to reassure people, do all the after sales that needed, and gradually penetrate the area you're in. So again, I'm aware.
That's fantastic. We're just going to pause for a second before you go into the next section.
Sure.
That's okay. So we had a few questions in, I think, while we're here, as well as a comment about how useful this map is. Just to take your top box, retail, we had one question about selling through distributors, by which I think we're talking not about your own distribution force, but distributors such as agro dealers or solar system distributors. So I think the question, I think if I understand the questioner, that really applies to your retail one. Are you saying that retail is fine if your product is known and doesn't need any promotion, but if it does need promotion, it's the rest of your map that you should look at?
So it's not only promotion that is the question, it's also the financing, delivery, maintenance, etc. Because solar home systems, typically, if they cost, and they usually cost over $50 at least, or maybe more generally $100, if your target is the base of the pyramid, true, your product might be known, but if you don't have financing to offer, then it won't sell. So just going through distributors and counting on them to do credit. What we've seen for the largest solar home system companies that sell to the base of the pyramid have set up relatively similar models, which are branches. We had Willem from Solar Now last week, who was testifying that he tried a franchise approach by franchising local distributors to sell his products, hoping they would do the credit and the after sales, etc. And who decided about a year and something ago to change that approach because it didn't give him enough control on the quality of the work that these distributors were doing, while it was his brand that was put on the solar home systems. Given how much maintenance you need, and not just maintenance, but generally customer relationship you need for these big products to ensure your client is happy and benefits from the product, you have to have control on your distribution network. So going through dealers or distributors is probably not going to do the trick. Again, if you're trying to reach the base of the pyramid, it can work for richer clients, no problem. But if you're trying to reach the base of the pyramid, who's going to need financing, who's going to need maintenance because probably they don't really know how to take care of their system, etc., you're going to need to set up your own system. And if you need that promotion, then the answer to here is a yes. It's not an FMCG, it's a durable good. Does it require credit? Probably, given the cost. The farming model is really the most adapted one. For
Right.
Seeds, it's a little bit different. It depends how you're selling them. For example, I don't remember which company did this, but there's one company that started selling the packets of seed in very small sizes, which really made it affordable to people, and people understood that these seeds were quality. So they didn't need promotion anymore, neither financing, delivery, maintenance, and they went through retail, so through distributors, and that worked very well. So it's possible. Now, if your product is different in some way, if your product requires teaching the farmers new approaches so that they use it right, for example, or if it's sold in bigger bags that require financing or any other additional services, then you should probably consider the rest of the map here.
Great, thank you. So to Gerald, who asked that question, I think was concerned about whether the retailer or the distributor would promote their product. Gerald, I think Lucy's giving you lots of other reasons why you should be worried about the retailer. And this, as you said, was also covered by Willem last week about the lack of control over the network when it wasn't their own. And Lucy, I think you also covered it in the first webinar when we talked about financing options and how relying on others for financing options is not great. So there's several issues to think about there in reply to Gerald, who asked about that. And then there was another question. Lucy, could we just go back to the graph? Someone said, so it's very...
Which graph?
There
were lots of graphs.
With the price along the x-axis.
Yeah, sure.
David commented that no one is selling anything between $60 and $300 in your data. Why is that? Is there any reason?
That was just, well, there might be one reason. Back then, so we started this map based on the study we did on innovative devices back in 2013. And back then we looked at only 15 companies, and indeed we didn't have any, we actually had one in the middle, but there, which would have been probably around there, but they were actually working through agro dealers. Yeah, so not really doing any direct sales, and the model wasn't really working either. So we didn't include it, but there could have been one, which would have been about here on the map, just above the $20,000 sales per salespeople. But the salespeople were mostly selling through shops, which were then selling on to people. So there was one here which didn't really. So there are other ways of doing this, and this could probably be extended. I mean, that's why we've tried to summarize all this in the end map over there. Basically, that's why I'm saying these frontiers are a little bit fluctuating, because indeed, in particular, between the 100, what you're saying, the 60 to the $200 range, you could probably work out with these two models, depending on how much credit your product requires and how much local presence your product requires. It will be, so on this graph, we could probably extend that blue bubble all the way to the middle of the graph, and that gray bubble all the way to here as well, in terms of what could work. Now, we only represented here what we saw in real life. And since then, I mean, there was this one company I was mentioning now, but since then, all the other companies we've added to the map, which came from the workshops and benchmarks we've done since, none of them actually had a product in that price range. But I mean, there's no specific reason for that. Yeah.
Okay, that's a great point, and that relates to another question we've had, sort of where these bubbles might eventually touch. Mathabi has asked, if you were planning to upsell from products in the $0 to $20 range to larger systems, would you recommend starting with farming over on your right, or starting with the hunting model and gradually migrating to farming? I have a feeling you're going to say, well, I'll let you answer. I have a challenge with the proposition of the question. But
yeah, I'll answer with what I've seen, not what I think. What I've seen is that several companies started with one type of product and moved to another one, which belonged to another category. And they've realized they needed another sales force and another sales system. For example, Toyola with their cook stoves. People really trusted their sales agent because they had really allowed them to save money. And some people started hearing about solar home systems and asking Toyola, where can I get a solar home system? So Toyola saw the opportunity and started looking for the solar home system they could set up, and initially just tried to have the same people sell solar home systems as well, and also solar lanterns. What they realized is that their guys selling stoves actually preferred continuing selling stoves because they were selling very well these stoves and making a lot of money from continuing to sell stoves in new areas, versus learning a new pitch for a different product and having to do the pitch for both products at the same time, which took them twice as long to not sell twice as much. So that was for the solar lanterns. Now for the larger systems, Toyola ended up creating Toyola Solar, which is a different company with a different sales force and different processes to do that. Because it's just not, you don't need the same salespeople, technicians, processes when you do one versus when you do the other. I mean, I don't know if that's a great answer, but yeah, sorry.
We're having more questions on this, but I know you have another short section to touch on, and we're coming up to the hour. So what I want to suggest is that you quickly touch on your last section about technology and so on. We'll have 5 minutes on that. And then we will, for for those that want to stay on and come back to these very good questions we've got back on these graphs, we will add on, and Lucy's offered another 10 or 15 minutes for us to work through these questions. Let's just quickly do this final section of her presentation, and then we'll come back to this.
All right. So if we can have already the poll put up. So what do you think? A sophisticated IT system for sales and customer management is a luxury for social businesses operating in base of the pyramid markets, or is actually even more important in environments with poor infrastructure and limited resources? That's a simple question. So I'll count until 5 and we'll see the results. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Answer, please. Thank you very much. Very good. To that question, we got a majority of good answer. It's even more important in environments with poor infrastructure and limited resources, indeed. So let's try to see why, and let's try to see what is really important for a sales force to be effective. What we've seen is, and what we believe is that it's worth investing in what we call a modern sales force for the base of the pyramid, meaning a full-time mobile sales force. We could add specialized in there as well, with referrals, as in the Toyola model with evangelists that we touched upon, with customer relationship management tools and close management, because we've seen data shows that it can be more loyal and more effective. On the picture here, you can see a living good salesperson with their mobile. We're going to talk about their IT system in a minute. So indeed, what do we recommend? Investing in a modern sales force, so full-time mobile. We're going to get to the mobile in a minute. Second thing, choosing good managers. We're not going to touch upon this time, but this is a whole other section of our workshop on the topic. But basically, when you hire a manager, if you promote an existing salesperson, because that's a good salesperson, you're sure you're losing a good salesperson, but you're not sure you're getting a great manager. Typically, the two jobs are very different, and it's not necessarily a good idea to actually promote your sales force into managing roles. Again, there could be much more said on this, but I'll stop here. Then leveraging referrals to aggregate sales is a great way to make sure you have enough clients every time you make a move. And finally, leveraging technology is key. We're going to talk right now about the mobility aspect and the technology aspect of things. So on mobility, there are two aspects of how you can improve your mobility sales force. This is the first one, optimizing the sales force routes to really make sure they spend as much time as possible in front of their clients. First way to do this is to map the population and the territories you're covering to decide where to set up your warehouses and your basically your fixed points of contact with the customers. Two examples here, Semilla, which is a Danone project from Mexico, where they have sales ladies going door to door to sell yogurts and other dairy products. As you can see, that's a map from theirs. They basically assess all possible location for a new micro depot before setting it up by showing not just the streets, but all the main community centers, etc., to really figure out what will be the most promising place to then write different routes for their sales ladies. Similarly, BRAC, we talked about them before, for each of their community health workers, Shashtia Shebika, they make sure before assigning a new one that they'll have at least 200 potential households in their area so that they can sell enough to sustain a living. Then the second thing you can do once you have mapped your territory is assigning specific routes to your sales force. This is a map from Mi Tienda, which is a company in Mexico that delivers goods to local mom and pop shops. And they create very specific maps with 6 different routes for one group, because they have to go to a different routes every day of the week, Monday to Saturday. And so they assign to them the specific routes and the specific number of shops they have to see every day of the week. And finally, after assigning the route, you can monitor the Salesforce activity. You can do it old style, as you can see it on this graph, which was how BRAC used to do it. I'm not sure whether they've switched to IT yet or not. But they had a very comprehensive, even though paper-based, way of measuring all the activity of every single one of their over 50,000 Shashtia Shebika selling products, and really like writing down every single product that was sold to which family, etc. And that really allowed them to know how they were doing at any point in time, anywhere in their network. and to then optimize the routes based on if any of them had a problem. Second thing you can do is to make the Salesforce mobility, your Salesforce mobility, as easy as possible, which you can do in 3 ways. There are probably more, but these are the examples we've seen. The first one is sponsoring the travel costs of your Salesforce, which is what both Toyola and Purit do. They provide their agents with the travel stipends for every day they work to motivate them to travel, so that staying away won't be a hassle for them. Toyola additionally offers his staff car rental options. So they've bought a fleet of vehicles, and each of their sales agents, well, you couldn't say they're independent entrepreneurs because they're full-time with Toyola, but they're paid nearly only on commission plus that fee covering food and accommodation costs. But they can reinvest this fee into renting Toyola vehicles so that they can travel and can deliver the stoves whenever they need to. Finally, the last way we've seen is to basically gift a mobility option to your sales force. In the case of Project Shakti in India, which has, I think, also over 50,000, I don't remember the exact number, but over 50,000 sales ladies who deliver goods mostly to shops or also directly to some clients. They realized that they could gift a bike to these sales ladies so that the men in their family could cover not just their own village, but also the few villages around. And by involving an additional member of the family they more than doubled the sales of each sales lady. So, well, it's true there are a second person helping them now, but sales have gone up, have more than doubled. So the sales per salesperson have increased thanks to this system. And Unilever had gotten back the cost of these bags, which are pretty cheap, very quickly, thanks to the additional sales this has generated. Finally, on IT. Why is IT so important? I'll give you the example of Living Goods, which was one of the first, really a pioneering company in setting up a very complete customer relationship management and Salesforce management system. So Living Goods is a company based in Uganda and Kenya who sells different health-related products via a network of community health workers. So let's start from their cloud-based platform and actually from their sales agents. So the sales agent, when they get to a client, they take their mobile phone number and they send back real-time patient treatment information in case they sell, for example, tuberculosis treatment. Of course, they send back their daily sales reporting. And if the client makes any inquiries they can't answer directly, they send client inquiries. From the system, they get back client follow-up reminders. You should go back and see this client. He hasn't bought enough TB medicine for his treatment. Now is the time you should replenish his stock. And announcement of new products and programs, so they can always promote new products right when they're out. In addition, their sales performance goes back to their sales manager, thanks to the system, which allows them to do direct coaching via phone on the same day if there's any issue going on, like it's midday, the guy hasn't made any sales, probably he forgot to get up, the sales manager can coach the guy. Call him back and tell him to go to work, basically. The client can also interact directly with the system. He can send agent performance feedback. He can send treatment quality control information if anything goes wrong with the treatment. And he also gets direct information, such as treatment reminders. Don't forget to take your pills. Even if you look healthy, you actually might still have TB or malaria. Tailored education program, for example, for pregnant women, and specific promotions for new products. So all this system is very integrated and really allows Living Goods to follow day after day both how their clients are doing and make sure they're satisfied, and how their sales agents are doing and make sure their performance is good or otherwise it's acted upon. So that's all for today. We saw a lot. Thanks for sticking with us. So basically, in a nutshell, we've seen that Salesforce churn can and should be avoided, basically mostly with good salaries and compensation. We saw 4 direct Salesforce models for beneficial goods, and we saw what could also work for fast-moving consumer goods, basically monocategory Salesforce in urban areas. And finally, we've seen what a modern BOP Salesforce could look like. Just as a quick reminder, this is just 3 out of 10 key lessons learned, and actually these were the 10 key lessons learned we published in 2013, but we've added a few things, with some of which you've seen in the webinars we've done these few days. And I think I'll stop here.
Brilliant, thank you. We are going to come back to the very interesting questions we've had about payment and installments and client retention and the management ratio and microgrid multiple products, but we'll just sort of wrap up first for those that need to get off to other things, and then those of you who ask the questions, do hang on. If you want to hear the answers, hang on for a few more minutes. Please do go and look at the last 2 webinars if you have missed them on this bit.ly BOP marketing, because they're as jam-packed and interesting as today's was. Perhaps slightly more accessible, less hard work and brain cells, but really interesting. If you have more questions, Hystra can help individual companies, help benchmark you, help you with your strategy. So that's Lucy's direct email address. And if you haven't already, please do join the Practitioner Hub. You will then get our newsletter, our mini-series, which comes out once a month, plus our webinar announcements. We won't spam you. And on the Hub, you can find a know-how page about marketing at the base of the pyramid, which is jointly between us, ourselves, and Hystra. So there's lots more information for you. Finally, I have a really big request. We have provided this series of webinars for free, but we do need your feedback. We didn't manage to get sponsorship for this series, so we've all just done it out of our midnight oil. But we do need to get sponsorship for the next one, or we won't be able to afford to run Zoom and put in the work. To get sponsorship, we need to know what you find useful and show we are using it. Last week, about 20 or 30% filled in the feedback form. This week, I would really like more than 50%. Please fill in the feedback form. I don't care what you fill in, because if it's negative, we will respond to it. If it's positive, we'll be pleased. The feedback form will be sent to you within 10 minutes of this webinar closing.
And it's also available on the chat. I see it.
Oh, yes. The link is in the chat. You can even go there now while you're just finishing up. On that point, can we just come back to the final questions, Lucy? If you have a few more minutes. So we've had a few about people paying in installments. One question is, should the sales force be the same people who collect the installments? And someone's had a problem that the sales force get their commission up front at the sale, so then they have no incentive to collect the installments. Do you have any advice for that? And someone else asked about how to ensure client retention if continuing services and monthly payments are needed. So this issue about installment payment is clearly a big issue for people.
Okay. So regarding who should collect the payments, we've seen 2 things that work well, at least that I can recall now. One is indeed having either your salesperson or a technician collecting the payment. Grameen Shakti has a technician. So Grameen Shakti sells solar home systems in Bangladesh. They've sold over 1.5 million with this branch system. They have separate teams for salespeople and technicians. The salesperson is really the one who makes the sales. The technician comes to do the installation and then comes back every month, both to do a maintenance visit, which reassures clients a lot, and to collect the payment, which really creates this kind of quid pro quo between the company and the client, because the client knows if the product doesn't work, I'll stop paying. But at the same time, I also know the technician is coming. So if I want him to repair my product, I probably need to pay. So it really creates this kind of trust relationship, which is really key to manage to sell products and really key to create client satisfaction. So in that sense, it can be really good. Now that's working because Grameen Shakti's products are relatively expensive. So they can afford to have a technician going back every month to solve any client issue, because one product is maybe $100 to $500. It's more complicated if you're selling products that are around $30, $40, and then sending back one salesperson to see one client every week or every month is obviously tricky in terms of costs. So 2 things we've seen actually. One is, if you remember the evangelist from the Toyola method, Toyola actually also requests that they gather the money from the people who bought the previous month. So when they recommend 10 new clients, they get these clients to, so they get the stove to the clients and they tell them you pay in 1 month. When the sales guy comes back, the sales guy, before coming back, calls back the evangelist again and tells him, remember the client you sent me last week? I'm going to come back that day and I need to collect the money from them. And if you, by the way, if you have other clients, now is the time to tell me and you'll get your commission for that as well. But I need to get the money from my past clients, otherwise you don't get your commission for the next ones. And by doing that, so they make sure that when they come, the evangelist has at least part of the money collected. He might not have all of it, but at least he centralizes a bit the work. And then the sales agent might need to go and see himself, the guy who was saying, I'll pay tomorrow. But then when he sees the salesperson there, he actually pays. So using evangelist can work, basically the guys who have promoted your product initially. The last thing that we've seen work more and more is mobile payment whenever you can do them. I know it's not available in every country, but when it is, obviously it reduces the cost of collecting payments a lot. And one thing that works very well to increase payment rates is to send reminders to your client a few days before, and make sure that like tell them 2 days before, remember, in 2 days you have to pay. That has increased the repayment rates a lot. Yeah, I think that's about it. And then, I mean, if you're doing this, you still need to have the stick of, if you don't pay, something will happen. So the sales guy might still need to go back after a few months to just show he's there, and that people shouldn't forget to pay the following few months after that.
Thank you. And indeed, you did talk about client retention more last week when you talked about the importance of the after-sale process. Thank you. Someone asked about this management ratio that you mentioned, 1 manager to 5 to 6 sales agents. Is that what you recommend as standard?
1 manager to 5 to 8. See if you can get to 8, it's better because it's less expensive per sales agent. You might need to graduate slowly. Basically, one way some people do this is that they ask their managers to oversee maybe 3 or 4 sales agents at first and recruit the following ones, and they should get until 8. And if they get to 9, well, not 9, but maybe 9 to 10, then 3 of his agents are detached and a new manager is created who has to recruit again the following ones. So that's one way to manage it. Yeah, but basically 5 to 8 people is the optimal ratio we've seen in terms of cost versus efficiency of the management.
Thank you. Someone else asked about microgrids, whether we think about those as being both fast-moving consumer goods and are durable, and if that has an influence on how we should think about their distribution.
Well, microgrids are a whole different issue. So I have to say, first, we haven't seen that many sustainable microgrid systems working. The most interesting ones we've seen are actually now implementing pay-as-you-go solutions. So not having agents in person doing the collection, but having, again, this system where you have to pay via your mobile or via a remote system or via a code you buy to the retailer in your area that you put into your own system to access the electricity, basically prepaid codes for a certain amount of electricity. Which makes it not so necessary to have an agent collect. That was was the question specifically on collecting or on distribution or on?
It was more about the sort of categorization of microgrids.
Yeah, microgrids don't really fit in this because it's more selling a service than selling a good than selling a durable or a fast-moving consumer goods. But yeah, in terms of payments, same type of technology actually as for solar home systems work very well. In terms of promotion, below the line is again necessary, that's for sure. You can't just market it by sending email to people who don't have mail, obviously, in rural areas, or you can't just do that by radio. That might sound pretty obvious because obviously to install the microgrid, you in any case need to get there. But the ones we've seen getting to very high rates of penetration in a village really spent a long time in the village at the beginning to do that kind of marketing initially.
Thank you. And I think the last question relates to this single product, multiple product. Do living goods sales agents sell multiple products?
So living goods sell multiple products, but are monocategory in the sense that they only sell products that are health related. Well, actually, it's a tricky question because they have 2 different models in Uganda and Kenya, but the one we looked at most, which is the Uganda one, which was their first one, is community health workers. So they sell medicines and health related products, to which living goods added for a while improved cook stoves and solar lanterns, etc. which they did manage to sell very well until their sales agents saturated their area, because you're not going to buy 3 cook stoves. Once you have bought one, you bought one. So they're in the middle, because they're monocategory initially, but then they've added some other products, but then they've stopped adding some other products because there just wasn't that many more to sell. So yeah.
So just to clarify the important point you were making, it wasn't that the sales force shouldn't sell multiple products, it's that they shouldn't be multiple categories.
Yes.
I think that's an important clarification.
Yeah, you can definitely sell different models of stoves, you can sell different type of health products, just not products that require a completely different pitch.
Yeah. And I have one last question of my own. This has been very encouraging in this presentation and the other ones. You've shown real signs of success and very impressive sales records and very impressive distribution figures. But I feel slightly depressed about what you're saying about rural areas. There wasn't that much hope and scope for sustainable, commercially viable distribution of these new products in rural areas. Is that an overly negative interpretation of what you're saying?
I hope so. I hope so, in the sense that if you want to sell a new fast-moving consumer goods into rural areas, we haven't seen a sustainable approach to do that. Now, if you're actually selling durable goods like water filters or improved cook stoves or solar home systems, these work very well in rural areas. With a dedicated mobile sales force, these products have a sufficient unit value that you can actually pay a sales force going to even not so dense areas. So for these products, yes, you can still manage to sell them. For the beneficial goods that are in a format that is basically a recurring purchase, either you need to create awareness in cities first with a market-based sales force there, so that then the local rural areas know the product and you can use it retail. That's one possibility. Or you can use existing networks if they exist. Unfortunately, obviously, they don't always exist. Or that's where subsidized approach are needed. Because just it's not possible to have or in any case, if anybody knows of a system that works, I'm really interested, because we just haven't seen any that works for this specific case.
Okay, thanks. But on the durable goods, you see that it can work, and the cost of having that mobile sales force can be covered in a commercially viable way.
Yes.
To FMCG. Grand. I hope we have today addressed everybody's question. Thank you very much indeed. As I said, do contact Lucy, but if you have examples that you think do break any of these trends or bring in new information, we'd also love to hear about those. Lucy, I want to say a huge thank you to you, not only for today's webinar, but for all three. And thanks very much to our audience again. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.